Okay, now talking about the joint between two vertebrae. In the last section, in the last video, again, we discussed that we have these articular structures, the articulating structures on the back side of the vertebra, called as the facets, which, and it's like, this is one vertebra and this is the another vertebra. So the top facet of the lower vertebra and the bottom facet of the top vertebra, it gets attached, and that's what is called as the zygapophyseal joint, this one, or in short we call it as the facet joint. Okay, and if we talk a bit more about the facet joints, each vertebrae or each section between two vertebrae, we have a right facet joint and a left facet joint, and it's like it's the combination of all these facet joints, one on over the other, forms the articular pillar. We have a left articular pillar and the right articular pillar. Okay, so these are the two joints between two vertebrae, but this is not all the joints that we get to see between the vertebrae. We have another joint called as the interbody joint. So between the vertebral body of the top one and the vertebral body of the lower vertebra, this whole section, so this whole section, we call it as the interbody joint. So if someone asks you how many joints are there between two vertebrae, so we should say there are three joints between two vertebrae. So we have the right facet joint, the left facet joint, and then we have the interbody joint between two vertebral bodies. Of course, we have the intervertebral disc as well in that section. Okay, now if we talk about the structure, we have different angulations and different structures of these facet joints as we go all the way from the cervical spine to the thoracic and then to the lumbar. So in the cervical spine, here in this picture, in this one, we can see the angulation of the cervical spine is mostly like this. It's kind of at 45 degrees. And if we talk about the same facet joint in the thoracic spine, it gets more vertical, and it becomes almost like this, mostly vertical. And then in the lower part, in the lumbar section, this facet, which was kind of, so in the cervical spine it was like this, like two facets at 45-degree. In the thoracic spine, it became a bit facing forward and became like this. Not exactly vertical, but a bit tilted, but still mostly vertical, facing forward. But in the lower part of the spine, in the lumbar spine, it becomes like this. Each facet facing each other. So here, each facet faces each other. If I get a bit more technical about it, what we can see here is that the in the thoracic spine, the facet faces forward. So can we say that we have this frontal section, which kind of it faces forward, and then in the lower part, in the lumbar spine, we can see it's kind of following the sagittal plane. So in the thoracic spine, it follows the frontal plane, something like this, if I can make it properly. So it's facing forward. So we can say it's kind of the facet aligns mostly with the frontal plane. Here I'll mention it, frontal plane. And as we go down to the lumbar spine, it starts facing each other, and hence it's more in line with the sagittal plane. Okay, and it's all right. So mostly now this thing, I believe most of us, we know this, that the sagittal plane, it's like this. The sagittal plane cuts our body into a right and the left section. The frontal plane, it goes like this, cutting our body into the front and the back section. And then we have one more, the horizontal plane, which cuts our body into top and the lower section. So again, if I conclude the whole thing, the angulation of the thoracic spine, of the facets, in the thoracic spine, it faces mostly forward, mostly in line with the frontal plane. In the lumbar spine, it faces each other mostly in line with the sagittal plane, and in the cervical spine, it's mostly at 45-degree like this. So we can say it's something between the horizontal plane and we can say the frontal plane. So it's exactly between at 45-degree between the horizontal and the frontal plane. Now, why am I discussing about these things? It's because the orientation of the facet, it really determines the direction in which we get to see the mobility or the movement in that specific part of the spine. If I can make it a bit more simpler for you, so in the thoracic spine, so we will discuss the cervical spine in a bit, but specifically talking about the thoracic and the lumbar spine, I think it should be most easiest for us to understand the lumbar spine first. So in the lumbar section, as I said, the facet joints face each other like this. So let's say this is the lower vertebra and this is the upper vertebra. The top, the upper facet of the lower vertebra and the lower facet of the upper vertebra, they are mostly they are attached like this. So this is the right facet and this is the left facet. As I said, the facets are facing mostly like this. So if I am the lower vertebra, my top facet, my superior facet face is like this, and now the my superior vertebra, its lower facet is attached to me like this. So this is the right facet and this is the left facet. And now if we talk about the mobility, how these facets move, these facets will move like this, the right one and the left one will move like this in the sagittal plane. All right, which kind of defines why the vertebrae move mostly forward and backward, and hence we get to see mostly flexion extension movement in the lumbar spine. If I can repeat that, mostly we get to see the flexion extension movement or forward and backward tilting of the vertebrae in the lumbar spine, in the lowermost part of the spine. The reason being because of the orientation of the facets in the lumbar spine. So the facet faces mostly the sagittal plane. So the lower vertebra has its facet like this, and the upper vertebra has its facet attached to it like this. So the scope of mobility is like this in the right and the left facet, and hence causing this kind of movement in the vertebrae in the lumbar spine, and hence we get to see mostly flexion extension movement as a predominant motion in the lumbar region. If we can apply the same concept in the thoracic spine, as I discussed, the orientation of the facets in the thoracic spine, it faces mostly forward like this. So again, let's say this is the lower thoracic. Let's say this is T4, and the superior vertebra of T4 is facing like this forward, and the inferior vertebra of T3 is facing like this. So now the scope of mobility is like this in the thoracic spine. Hence, mostly we get to see side to side tilting in the thoracic region. Hence, we can say it's mostly side to side tilting as a predominant movement in the thoracic spine, and it's forward and backward tilting as a predominant movement in the lumbar spine. And if we can apply the same concept in the cervical region, we can say it's something exactly between like the horizontal plane and the frontal. So it's kind of at 45 degrees. So it has got a good best of both the worlds, we can say. So it has got good side to like for backward forward movement and sideway tilting as well. And if I can tell a bit more about the sideway tilting motion, if you have got a sideway tilting mobility, that vertebra is bound to have rotation movement as well. We would be discussing a bit more about this thing in the future videos, why if a vertebra or a bunch of vertebrae have sideway tilting mobility, how come they are supposed to have rotation movement as well. The reason we will discuss in the future videos. But for now, what we can see is the predominant backward forward movement is in the lumbar spine because of the orientation of the vertebrae like this, hence the mobility like this. In the thoracic spine, the orientation of the facet is mostly facing forward, hence the movement like this, and hence it's mostly the sideway tilting like this. So the mobility is like this and the vertebrae tilt like that. And in the cervical spine, it's a good of backward forward and sideway tilting as well. So hence we get to see most of the movements in the cervical spine, and mostly flexion extension in the lumbar spine, and mostly sideway tilting combined with rotation in the thoracic spine.